What happens when a strict HOA board member calls 911 on her own neighbor, only to find out the man she accused is the father of the deputy who responds? Imagine standing on your own porch, adjusting the keypad lock you just installed to keep your family safe, when someone from down the street suddenly grabs the handle of your front door as if it belonged to them. That's exactly what happened to Anthony Duran, a 49-year-old electrician living in Mesa, Arizona. It was a Sunday afternoon in late spring, the kind where kids were pedaling bikes between cul-de-sacs and the smell of barbecue drifted from backyards. For Anthony, it should have been a peaceful day, but instead he found himself staring at his neighbor Lorraine Pritchard, the woman who chaired the HOA board, her hand tugging hard on his doorknob. Anthony stepped closer. "Lorraine, what are you doing?" His voice wasn't angry yet, just firm. Lorraine barely turned her head. "Checking that lock wasn't there before. This property could be abandoned, or worse, broken into." Anthony blinked. "I live here, you know that." Lorraine's lips pressed tight. She pulled her phone from her handbag and began swiping. Anthony recognized the 911 screen almost instantly. Inside the house, Anthony's wife Charlotte peeked through the blinds. "What on earth is going on out there?" she called. "HOA business," Lorraine snapped, as though that explained everything. Her finger hovered above the call button. "We can't have strangers moving in without clearance. Rules are rules." Anthony felt his stomach twist. He'd worked hard for this house, for his two-story brick place with the front yard he landscaped himself every Saturday. He paid his dues like everyone else, yet here he was, treated like an intruder. Before Anthony could stop her, Lorraine pressed the button and began speaking rapidly to the dispatcher. "Yes, I'd like to report suspicious activity at 4022 East El Moro Drive. There's a man trying to get into the house, and I don't think he belongs here." She gave Anthony a quick glance, as if daring him to argue. Anthony muttered, "This is absurd." Charlotte opened the front door, stepping onto the porch with crossed arms. "If you think we don't belong here, then you've lost touch with reality." Lorraine lifted her chin, phone still to her ear. "Ma'am, please step back inside for your safety." That was the final straw. Anthony laughed bitterly. For her safety, she's my wife. Children down the street had stopped riding their bikes, drawn by the tension. A couple of neighbors emerged from their driveways, curious. The air grew heavy, not with silence, but with judgment. An entire cul-de-sac turning into an audience. Anthony tried reason. "Lorraine, you've lived here long enough to know who I am. You've seen me mow this lawn. You've waved when I pulled this truck into the driveway. Why are you doing this?" Lorraine didn't answer directly. "We have procedures. I can't risk being wrong." Charlotte's voice cut sharper than her husband's. "What you're risking is humiliating yourself in front of this entire neighborhood." But Lorraine stood rigid, convinced of her righteousness. The dispatcher had promised to send an officer. That was all she needed to hear. Anthony ran a hand over his face, torn between anger and disbelief. His house, his door, his life suddenly being called into question by a woman who believed HOA authority gave her the right to dictate who belonged and who didn't. Inside his chest, a strange mix of emotions battled: frustration, embarrassment, a slow creeping sense that no matter what he said, it wouldn't matter until someone else validated him, someone in uniform. And that was the cruelest part, because the officer on the way wasn't just a cop from the county, it was his son. But what Anthony didn't know yet was that this 911 call would not only test his patience, it would expose something deeper about perception, authority, and the way neighbors see one another.
The 911 dispatcher's voice carried through Lorraine's phone speaker as she gave her report. She stood at the edge of Anthony's porch, like she was protecting the entire neighborhood, though to everyone else, it looked more like she was making a spectacle. "Yes, he's still here," she repeated to the dispatcher. "He says he lives here, but I don't recognize him. Please send someone quickly." Anthony spread his hands wide. "You don't recognize me, Lorraine? For crying out loud, you borrowed jumper cables from me last winter when your car battery died." Charlotte added, "And we brought soup to your place when you had the flu." "But sure, go ahead and tell the police we're strangers." Neighbors whispered across driveways. Now the Reynolds family across the street stood with folded arms, while Mr. Johnson leaned against his mailbox like he was watching live theater. A cluster of kids sat on the curb, helmets still strapped on, their bikes abandoned. Anthony sighed heavily and said under his breath, "This is ridiculous." Then louder, When they get here, you'll regret this." Lorraine ignored him, walking a few steps away to finish her call in private. She spoke in a hushed but urgent tone, her voice carrying just enough for everyone to hear snippets. "Man on the porch can't open the door, says he lives here, I don't buy it." Inside his chest, Anthony felt the frustration settle into something heavier. He'd lived through uncomfortable moments before. Side comments at supply stores, the occasional lingering look at restaurants. But this was different. This was his own neighborhood, his own front porch, his family watching as his legitimacy was put on trial by a woman who refused to see him for who he was. Charlotte placed her hand on his arm. "Don't let her get under your skin." "I'm not trying to," he said, his voice low. "But this is crossing a line." Lorraine's phone finally clicked off. She slipped it back into her purse, adjusting her sunglasses with exaggerated composure. "They'll be here any minute, then we'll see who's right." The faint rumble of tires on asphalt broke the tension.
A patrol SUV turned the corner, sunlight flashing across the windshield. Conversations hushed instantly. Children shuffled back. Neighbors who had been bold enough to gawk from their lawns suddenly pretended to check their mailboxes or pull weeds. Anthony straightened his shoulders, bracing himself for whatever came next. Charlotte whispered, "Stay calm, just stay calm." The SUV rolled to a stop in front of the Durand home and the driver's door opened. A tall, uniformed deputy stepped out, his badge catching the light. His expression was focused, professional. But as soon as his eyes landed on Anthony, something flickered across his face, recognition mixed with disbelief. "Dad?" The words sliced through the quiet like a clap of thunder. Neighbors froze, turning their heads in unison. Lorraine blinked behind her sunglasses, suddenly thrown off balance. Anthony exhaled slowly, almost relieved. "Julian!" Deputy Julian Durand, Anthony's 28-year-old son, walked up the driveway, his boots steady against the pavement. His tone was calm, measured, but his jaw tightened with every step. "I got a call about a suspicious person. I didn't expect it to be my own father." Charlotte smiled faintly, though her eyes still burned with anger. "Good to see you, Julian." Lorraine's mouth opened, but for the first time all day, she couldn't form a sentence. Julian turned toward her. "You made the call, yes." Lorraine managed, her voice faltering. I thought he was breaking in." Julian's brows drew together. "You thought my dad, standing on his own porch, was breaking in?" Anthony folded his arms. "That's exactly what she thought."
Charlotte added sharper, and she tried the door herself before calling, "Who does that?" Julian glanced back at the patrol car, then at the growing group of spectators. He lowered his voice, though the weight of it carried. "Ma'am, this is not a case of suspicious activity. This is a homeowner standing in front of his own house." Lorraine adjusted her sunglasses again, searching for composure. "I was only looking out for the neighborhood. It's my responsibility as part of the board." "No," Julian said firmly. "Your responsibility is to enforce guidelines fairly, not to call the police on a man you've known for years because you convinced yourself he didn't belong."
Anthony glanced at his son, pride etched across his face. "You're right. Maybe the lesson isn't just for this block. Maybe it's bigger than that." Charlotte joined them with 2 glasses of iced tea. Handing one to Anthony, she sat on the railing, listening as father and son shared the kind of silence that didn't weigh heavy. It comforted. Finally, Anthony broke it. "If there's one thing I want people to remember from all this, it's simple. Ask before you assume. Respect before you accuse. And never forget that every house on this street is more than bricks and paint. It's a family, a story, a life that deserves dignity." Charlotte reached for his hand, squeezing gently. "That's the lesson, Anthony. That's what will last." He raised his glass of tea slightly as if making a quiet toast to better neighbors, to better choices. Julian lifted his water bottle in return. And to never letting silence excuse what's wrong. The 3 of them sat together as the evening settled in, porch light glowing against the deepening sky. Anthony knew the neighborhood might never be perfect,
People would still argue about weeds, parking, and paint colors. But what had happened that night, what everyone had seen, was burned into memory. And sometimes memory is what keeps people accountable.